At 5 p.m. on May 13, 1989, in the live studio of a local TV station in Las Vegas, USA, a young man spoke words to the camera that would shake the world. He said that the US government had 9 alien spacecraft hidden in a secret base deep in the Nevada desert, a base that was invisible on any map. He had personally touched the spacecraft and even read top-secret briefings. One of the ships, he said, came from a binary star system more than 30 light-years away. On the night the program aired, he received a phone call. The caller said, "You have no idea what we're going to do to you," and then hung up. From that moment on, this young man's life began to be forcibly erased by an invisible hand. His academic records could no longer be found, his employment history vanished, and even his former neighbors denied ever having seen him. In just a few short months, he went from being a government secret project engineer to being labeled by everyone in America as a madman, a fraud, and a paranoid. His name is Bob Lazar. For 36 years, he has been telling the same story, from being relentlessly ridiculed by mainstream media in the 1980s, to the Trump administration just launching a large-scale declassification of UFO files, to the official release of his documentary, S4, The Bob Lazar Story. In today's 25 minutes, let's talk about this man known as the most dangerous man in America, the true top figure in the UFO community, and find out what kind of story he has been telling. What previously unknown information has been revealed in his latest documentary? What UFO secrets did he reveal? Meet Bob. Born in 1959, this child prodigy was obsessed with physics, engines, and energy devices. He even assembled a particle accelerator in his own garage. Later, he made his way into Los Alamos National Laboratory. Los Alamos was the place where the atomic bomb was developed and is the highest-level nuclear weapons laboratory in the United States. In 1982, Bob thought his commute to work was too slow, so he installed a jet engine in the trunk of a Honda, creating a jet-powered Honda that could reach speeds of up to 200 miles per hour. Every day, he drove this car to work. This incident made him famous and even landed him on the front page of the local newspaper. On the very day the newspaper was published, the father of effective computing, Edward Teller, came to the lab to give a lecture. Bob went over to introduce himself, saying, "Hey, the guy in the newspaper is me." That's how the two met, and Teller was deeply impressed by this young man. A few years later, Bob moved to Las Vegas. Wanting to return to the research field, he started sending out resumes, and one of them was sent to Teller. Teller still remembered him. Teller recommended him to a company called EG&G. The name sounds quite ordinary, but this company is actually at the deepest level among US defense contractors, specializing in projects related to all nuclear tests and top-secret operations. Thanks to Teller's recommendation, Bob soon received a phone interview. The interview took place in a rather inconspicuous Special Projects Department at McCarran Airport in Las Vegas. The interviewer told him that the work location was in a remote area, the job involved advanced propulsion systems, and the schedule was 2 weeks on, 1 week off. Bob was required to sign a large stack of confidentiality agreements, and he was successfully hired. A few days later, Bob was told to go to a specific terminal at McCarran Airport. The plane was called the Janet flight. Its white fuselage was painted with a red stripe, but there were no airline logos, only a tail number. It looked quite strange. This was a dedicated passenger jet to the secret bases in the Nevada desert. Even today, it is still flying. The place where the plane lands is the world-famous Area 51. But the place where Bob worked was not in Area 51. He switched to a bus, which drove farther and farther along an ordinary concrete road. Soon, even the signs along the way disappeared. Finally, the bus stopped at the foot of a mountain. Bob saw a group of hangars halfway up the mountain. The doors of the hangars were built at an angle, blending seamlessly with the mountain itself. From a distance, you couldn't even tell they were buildings. This place is called S4. Next, we're going to talk about Bob. What did he see inside S4? It's hardcore all the way, so pay close attention. Bob later recalled that on his first day inside, all he did was fill out a bunch of forms to get security clearance. But from the second day on, things started to change. The day Bob was taken into the main hangar, the hangar door happened to be open. Normally, they would always use the side door. When he looked up, he saw a disc-shaped aircraft parked inside. It was a dark metallic color with no markings at all, except for a small American flag sticker on the side. This little American flag sticker will play a big role later on, so keep an eye on this detail, friends. Bob's first reaction at the time was quite interesting. Instead of saying, "Wow, an alien spacecraft," he thought, "Oh, so those UFO sightings?" They were all secret planes of the US military, so it turns out all those advanced fighter jets were made by us. He even felt like laughing a little, so he reached out to touch the craft, but was immediately scolded by an armed guard who told him to keep his eyes forward, hands at his sides, and follow along. Later, Bob learned that the craft was called the Sport Model Flying Saucer. It had a diameter of 52 feet, about 16 meters wide, and was approximately 5 meters tall. It was one of the smaller craft belonging to a mothership. The entire S4 hangar housed a total of 9 ships, each with a different shape. The first one was this classic disc shape. The second one looked like a large hat with a very tall dome. The third was called the Jelly Mold. Its shape resembled an upside-down pudding with wavy edges. The fourth one was a very flat disc, like a wide-brimmed straw hat. When it was standing there on its thin side, Bob remembered there was a distinct bullet hole, as if something had pierced through it from the north. As for the other ships, Bob only caught a glimpse of them through the open hangar doors, and each one had a different shape. As for the origins of these ships, Bob once vaguely overheard that at least one of them was excavated from an archaeological dig. In other words, it wasn't the one that crashed in the 1947 Roswell incident. Some of them date back to ancient times and may have been on Earth longer than human civilization itself. But these things weren't even what shocked Bob the most, because what happened next completely shattered his worldview. A few days later, Bob was taken to a laboratory where he met his partner, Barry. On Barry's desk, there was an object. A metallic hemisphere about the size of a basketball was fixed onto a small metal plate. Barry said to Bob, "Come on, try touching this sphere." Bob reached out, but no matter what he did, he couldn't touch it. It wasn't because there was a glass cover or any kind of barrier. When his hand was still about 20 centimeters away from the sphere, it would be pushed back by some mysterious force. The closer he got, the stronger that repulsive force became. Bob was a rigorously trained industrial physicist, and he knew exactly what this was. It was an anti-gravity field. Here, in order to accommodate as many viewers as possible, I need to explain this, because it's the most crucial piece of physics knowledge in this story. Within the framework of modern human physics, all objects with mass attract each other. The Earth pulls on the moon pulls on the ocean, which is why we have tides. When you jump, you fall back down because the Earth exerts an attractive force. This force is called gravity. Humans are able to create magnetic fields, electric fields, and various electromagnetic fields on Earth, but up to now, we still cannot create a gravitational field. In modern scientific understanding, gravity is one of the 4 fundamental forces. It is the only one that humans cannot actively control. The only way to influence it is through mass. A large planet with greater mass has stronger gravity, while a small planet with less mass has weaker gravity. Other than that, there is no other way. This is the ceiling of modern physics. But this basketball-sized little machine on Barry's table is able to generate a repulsive gravitational field out of thin air. To give an analogy, it's like 2 magnets with their north poles facing each other. When you try to push them together, you can feel an invisible force in the middle pushing them apart. This is the effect of like poles of magnets repelling each other. What Bob felt with his hand at the time was exactly this sensation, but the feeling wasn't caused by a magnetic field, because magnetic fields react to ferrous metals and have no effect on the human body or flesh. This machine generates an invisible gravitational barrier, which exerts a repulsive force on everything. Anything that comes close will be pushed away. Such a phenomenon does not exist in our current human understanding of the universe. At that moment, no one knew who had created it. Bob was completely stunned. It was the first time he realized that this was not Earth technology. But what's even more astonishing is yet to come. Barry told him that this small hemisphere was actually the reactor of a spacecraft. And how does this reactor work? Listen carefully, everyone. The reactor contains a mysterious fuel known as element 115. This fuel was shaped into a triangle and placed inside a device resembling a miniature particle accelerator. The machine would continuously bombard it with protons, and in the instant of bombardment, something extremely rare would be produced. It's called antimatter. According to modern physics, once antimatter comes into contact with ordinary matter, both will be completely and instantly annihilated, converting entirely into a tremendous amount of energy. And this energy is the power source for the entire spaceship. But the truly bizarre part isn't here yet, because while this machine is releasing energy, it also produces something called gravitational waves. These gravitational waves are first transmitted to 3 amplifiers, each about the size of a trash can. And after being further amplified, they're then sent into 3 cylindrical emitters, and finally, these emitters project the gravitational waves outward. These gravitational waves form the invisible but powerful anti-gravity barrier around the spacecraft, which is what pushes everything away and allows it to overcome Earth's gravity and hover in the air. It sounds rather complicated and not easy to understand. In short, this spacecraft doesn't rely on jet fuel or rocket propulsion, but instead uses a kind of counter-thrust to oppose Earth's gravity. This allows it to break free from Earth's physical laws and fly. So what triggers the generation of this counter-thrust? Friends, think back. It's that mysterious fuel we just talked about, called element 115. So does this mean that as long as we process this element in the same way, humans could also invent flying saucers? No, because this element is not a substance found on Earth. Fast forward 15 years to 2003, when a Russian research institute managed to synthesize a few atoms of this same element, called element 115. However, they only existed for less than a second before decaying. After several more successful syntheses, by 2016, the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry officially added this 115th element to the periodic table and named it moscovium. So when Bob heard about element 115 from Barry in 1988, it was still a full 15 years before humans would first synthesize this element, and it would be another 28 years before it was officially recognized as the 115th element on the periodic table. Most importantly, Barry also told Bob at the time that the element 115 they had was stable and did not decay. However, all the element 115 isotopes synthesized by humans later were unstable and would decay within a second. So, the stable element 115 that triggered the anti-gravity propulsion was brought by the spacecraft. It simply does not exist on Earth. Let's go back to S4. Bob once had the opportunity to be allowed inside the spacecraft to take a look. The moment he walked in, he said he felt a very strange sensation. The entire spacecraft was divided into 3 levels. The bottom level was the emitter, with 3 cylindrical devices arranged facing the ground. The middle level was the main cabin, with the reactor right in the center and 3 equally spaced seats. Surrounding the reactor were 3 rectangular gravity amplifiers, corresponding to the 3 emitters below. As for the topmost level, Bob didn't go up there. He suspected that level was for navigation or housed a computer-like system. What impressed him the most wasn't the structure, but the material. Everything inside the entire spacecraft was made of the same deep, absorptive color. Something that looked like metal, yet also like ceramic, and felt cold to the touch. Most importantly, there wasn't a single right angle. All the seams were smoothly fused curves, as if someone had molded it out of wax and then heated the whole thing as one piece. Everything seemed to be slightly fused together. The whole spacecraft didn't look like it had been assembled, but rather as if it had grown directly or had been printed out in one go. But back then, in 1988, 3D printing technology, it would still be another 20 years before it appeared. As for the height inside the spacecraft, someone over 1.7 meters tall wouldn't be able to stand up straight. So Bob speculated that the beings who designed this spacecraft were about half the height of a human, that is, less than 1 meter tall. The seats were also designed for small individuals. There were no buttons, no screens, no control panels, no toilets, nothing you could recognize, completely unfamiliar, completely uniform. However, Bob did find something on the wall. On the side of the spacecraft, there were several black panels that looked like portholes. He looked at one of them, and then that panel instantly changed from solid metal to transparent. Well, nowadays, we actually have a similar technology called smart glass. Bob was both excited and nervous about his experience at S4. Just as he was eagerly wanting to learn more, he was suddenly fired for a rather absurd reason. At the time, Bob had just gotten married, and because his work was highly classified, he would often receive phone calls in the middle of the night. He would be urgently called away, which made his wife start to suspect that he was having an affair, but because he had signed a non-disclosure agreement, he couldn't say anything. As it turned out, he wasn't the one having an affair. His wife ended up getting involved with a flight instructor first, and then the Department of Defense started monitoring them. When the Department of Defense discovered that there was a marital crisis in the family, they determined that this employee's emotions and personal life were likely to be unstable in the near future. Therefore, if he continued to participate in this top-secret project, it would pose a risk, so his involvement was suspended. Bob's security clearance was revoked, but he didn't passively accept this outcome. You have to understand, at that time he was only in his 20s and had just witnessed the greatest secret in human history with his own eyes. Then all of a sudden, he was told he couldn't go back and that he had to take all of it to the grave. How could he possibly bear that? At the very least, he wanted his good friends to see it for themselves. So he invited his friends, knowing that the S4 flight tests were scheduled for Wednesday nights each week. On one Wednesday, he took his friend Gene Huff out to the nearby desert. The first time, they were completely stunned as they watched a disc-shaped object silently rise from the ground. There was a faint blue corona glowing underneath it. When it reached about 1 or 2 meters high, the blue light disappeared and it hovered in the air. It then made several 90-degree turns before quietly landing back on the ground. Throughout the entire process, there was no sound at all, no air disturbance whatsoever. The friends were so shocked that they were left speechless. After the first time, there was a second and a third time. Bob and his friends grew bolder each time. They even drove an RV through it. Then, one time, he and Gene were leaning against the front of the car, joking around, when suddenly, about 20 feet in front of them, something fell from above. There was a flash of green light, and it slowly rolled to their feet. It was a night vision goggle. The night vision goggle had fallen from the hand of a guard hiding in the dark. When Bob turned on the car headlights, he saw a whole row of armed men standing in front of him. Bob was then taken to Indian Springs Air Force Base for interrogation. During the questioning, someone read him transcripts of conversations between his wife and his lover, threatening him, but they did not arrest him. Bob realized that they wouldn't let him off so easily. The more he thought about it, the more worried he became, so he made a decision. He found the most famous investigative journalist in the area, George Knapp, and told him the whole story. Later, Knapp told him, "I'm going to air this on today's 5 o'clock news." At the last minute, Bob had second thoughts and got into a scuffle with Knapp, trying to snatch back the videotape. But Knapp was bigger and stronger, and he won the struggle for the bag. He put the tape into the player, and the news was broadcast just like that. That very night, Bob received the phone call we mentioned at the beginning of our program. You have no idea what we're going to do to you. What happened next unfolded so quickly that even Bob himself couldn't keep up. The US government began systematically erasing all evidence of his existence. Records of his work at the Los Alamos National Laboratory disappeared, as did his academic records from MIT and Caltech. He said his name was on those documents, but now none of those documents existed. It wasn't just him being targeted. People he knew started to suffer one by one. Some were audited by the IRS, others had their security clearances revoked, and a friend who worked at a shooting range and was waiting for his clearance had it directly withdrawn. People lost their jobs because of this. It seemed that everyone who knew him was paying a price. As for Bob himself, he went from being a promising young physicist to being labeled a pseudo-scientific fraud by mainstream media. To this day, Wikipedia still describes him as a conspiracy theorist. But it was precisely because he stepped forward that time that the UFO topic shifted in the US from a fringe superstition to an issue discussed nationwide. You could say that if he hadn't walked into that local TV station's live broadcast back then, there wouldn't be the UFO file declassifications under the Trump administration, nor would we be here today discussing the topic of UFOs. So he was the person who pushed open this door. But as for whether what Bob said is actually true, it really sounds unbelievable to me. What do you think about this, friends? After hearing all this, if you tend to believe what he said, give me a believe. If you're less than 50% convinced, give me a don't really believe. If you're 50-50, type still observing. Let's continue to see whether what Bob said is true. First, let's look at Bob himself. Investigative journalist George Knapp spent several years digging through a lot of information to find out whether Bob's identity was real. In the end, he found an internal phone directory from the Los Alamos Laboratory from 1982, and Bob Lazar's name was printed on it in black and white. He also found the front page headline of Los Alamos Laboratory's own newspaper from that same year. It was about Bob and his jet-powered Honda car. So how could someone who supposedly never worked at Los Alamos appear in the phone directory and even make the front page headline of the lab's own newspaper? On the other hand, if Bob were making it up, why has he been telling exactly the same story for 36 years? A fraud wouldn't have that much patience. Con artists change their stories and come up with new sensational claims to make money. And Bob has never made money from UFOs. More importantly, there are the details revealed in this latest S4 documentary. This documentary, called The Story of S4, was released on Amazon on April 3rd. This is the first time that humanity has used the most advanced visual technology to fully recreate what Bob saw with his own eyes. It's not just a single image, nor is it a dramatized scene. Instead, it's a 1-to-1 3D reconstruction of the entire S4 base, the sport model flying saucer, and all the components inside the spacecraft based on real dimensions, actual physical parameters, and the optical properties of real materials. The person who made this documentary is no ordinary individual. His name is Luigi Venditelli, and he is the key to the credibility of this film, so we have to introduce him. He is not a UFO enthusiast. He is a true industrial-grade 3D visual engineer. He spent 5.5 years working with Bob Lazar to make this documentary, using professional-grade 3D software like that used in Avatar and the Avengers. Only 10% of the film is generated by AI. The remaining 90% was painstakingly built frame by hand based on real physical parameters. He even specially made a set of VR headsets for Bob, allowing Bob to put on the glasses and walk into this virtual S4. This was so that Bob could point out on the spot which parts matched his memories and which didn't, and suggest how to improve them. The first time Bob put on the VR headset again, he exclaimed, "It's as if you downloaded it straight from my brain." It was this meticulous approach to production. Luigi unexpectedly discovered 3 details, and these 3 details became the strongest evidence today for determining whether Bob was telling the truth about the old characters or not. The first detail is about the darkness inside the spaceship. When Bob described the interior of the spaceship, one thing he has repeatedly emphasized for 36 years is that it was extremely dark. Extremely dark. There were 2 industrial yellow halogen lamps, each with 4 spotlights pointing upwards. Luigi's team recreated the lighting based on the actual wattage of the halogen lamps used at US military bases in 1988, and then entered the virtual spaceship interior themselves using VR. They found that it was truly pitch black. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. At first, Luigi thought Chen Shu had made a bug, so he went to ask the technician, but after checking, the technician confirmed there was no bug. All the lights were on, but in the end, they had to increase the brightness to 20 times the original intensity before the scene became visible. Sister Roy said that a liar could never come up with such details. A liar might say that there are lights inside the spacecraft, but they wouldn't add that it was extremely dark. A liar might make up that the interior of the spacecraft was cool and futuristic, but what Bob said was that it seemed like the materials inside absorbed all the light. Only someone who has actually seen it with their own eyes would describe such a physical characteristic. The second detail is about the American flag on the spacecraft. Do you remember we mentioned earlier that Bob saw a reversed American flag on the side of the spacecraft? In the past, many people used this detail to attack Bob, saying he was lying because according to common sense, the stars and stripes section of the American flag should be in the upper left corner. But Bob said that on the spacecraft, the stars and stripes section of the flag was in the upper right corner. The entire flag looked as if it had been mirrored. How could this be possible? It must be fake. But Luigi's team investigated and found that this wasn't wrong. In fact, it was exactly right. In Chapter 4 of the United States Code regarding the flag, there's a rule about the American flag displayed on all military vehicles. It must look as if the flag is flying forward. What does that mean? Imagine you're holding a flagpole and running forward. The flag flutters backward in the wind. From your right shoulder's perspective, the stars section is close to your body. That is, it's close to the direction you're moving, and the entire flag streams backward. The US military stipulates that if the flag is on the left of a vehicle or aircraft, the stars should be in the upper left. But if displayed on the right, the stars must be in the upper right, appearing as a mirror image, reversed. This is because the flag should appear to fly forward, so the stars must be positioned close to the front. The side of the vehicle where the front is, the side of the vehicle's nose. This is the actual regulation of the US military. On all US military tanks, Humvees, fighter jets, and Air Force One, the flag on the right side always appears as a mirror image. And when Bob caught a glimpse of that spacecraft in 1988, for more than 30 years since then, he has always insisted that the stars and stripes of the flag he saw were facing to the right. If he had made up this detail, there's no way he could have gotten it so accurate. This military regulation is something ordinary people simply don't know. Even Bob himself only figured it out later. Why is that? Because this is a detail that only someone who has seen it with their own eyes would blurt out. The third point is also the most significant discovery in this documentary. There is a researcher in Luigi's team named Veronica who found a map in an old archive from the US Department of the Interior. It's a 1941 edition. This map is publicly available, but almost no one has ever noticed it. On the map, there's a clearly marked road leading directly from the direction of the Nevada test site into a mountain beside Papoose Lake, precisely entering the interior of the mountain. This location is exactly where Bob said S4 is situated, but Luigi also dug up the 1950 and 1952 editions from the same map series, and amazingly, this road was gone. It was erased. So at this point, have you started to sense something? What year was 1941? In 1941, the Pacific War had just begun, and the average American had never even heard of the concept of UFOs. The term UFO only entered the public eye after the 1947 Roswell incident. But as early as 1941, at least 6 or 7 years before the public began discussing UFOs, there was already a road on internal US government maps leading to that mysterious base in the mountain. This means that the US government was already doing something inside that mountain at least 6 or 7 years before the concept of UFOs even entered the public consciousness. Erasing a road from the map is a very specific action. It means that at some point someone issued an order to remove this road, making it invisible to everyone, making it disappear from the map from then on. Is this the administrative fingerprint left behind by a top-secret project? So what about Roy and Bob? Later, they made a speculation. The interior of that mountain was originally a silver mine, and the tunnels had already been dug long ago. Later, when the CIA took over this area, they directly used the original county's mine tunnels and converted them into the S4 facility, then erased this road from subsequent maps. That's why in 1988, when Bob took a bus 15 miles south from Area 51, he was finally brought to a facility built into the mountainside. The inside of this mountain had actually been hollowed out long ago. So, friends, what do you think of these 3 points? Are you convinced? Either Bob Lazar is the greatest con artist in history who spent 36 years setting all of this up, or what he's been saying since 1989 is actually true. Now that you've heard all this, do you believe it, my friends? Let me know in the comments. If we assume that what Bob says is true, then we have to admit that we are living in a very special era today. The most fundamental understanding that humanity has built over thousands of years, that we are the only intelligent life in this universe, that we are the pinnacle of all species, and that our physics can explain all the laws governing the world, this entire set of beliefs would be fundamentally shaken. 9 spacecraft of various shapes are hidden inside a mountain in the Nevada desert, and at least one of them is older than human civilization itself. They use a method of flight that our human physics is still completely unable to explain. Just how many more mysteries are there in outer space that humanity has yet to uncover? Thinking about this, I wonder how you all feel. As for me, I can't help but feel a deep sense of awe. The door that Bob Lazar pushed open 36 years ago is now being opened bit by bit. This marks the end of an era and the beginning of a new one. Subscribe to Zhengguandian, and together we'll follow the major trends and record history. Alright, that's all for today's discussion. Friends, did you enjoy this story? There was really a lot of content today, so if you feel that something wasn't explained clearly, please let me know in the comments. Let's discuss it together there. If you haven't given me a like yet, please remember to do so before you leave. New friends, you're welcome to subscribe to Zhengguandian, and I also ask everyone to share my program with more friends to help spread my voice even further. Every interaction from you helps trigger YouTube's recommendation algorithm, allowing my hard work to be seen by more people. So thank you all in advance. All right, I wish everyone a happy weekend, and we'll meet again at the same time on Tuesday on Zhengguandian. Don't miss it. Bye-bye.